Chapter 3 of When Sleeping Giants Wake. And this chapter is called Boots and Shoes. Once darkness set in, the other giants began to arrive in twos and threes. Some of the giants collected friends who hadn't received an invitation themselves, but they knew that everyone would be welcome at Plumpton's cosy cottage. The giants were eager to meet Uncle Shakespeare's relatives and hear tales from the more southerly parts. Very few giants live downwind of Yorkshire and Derbyshire, and the ones that do are quite small. In fact, by the time you reach London, there are no giants at all. And by the time you reach Cornwall, the pixies have appeared. Pixies and giants can't live in the same lands. The pixies are considered pests and get stamped on. Soon the cottage was filled with the jolly frames of Buttertubs and Bertha from the Northern Pass, and Buttertub's good friends and fellow Morris dancers, Ripley, Crummock, Dandymeyer, Armscliff and Kettlewell. They had even brought their long swords with them, ready to dance a reel. Aunt Betty had rushed around the cottage clearing corners in order to make sleeping space for all the visitors. Plumpton had thick roll-out mats that were reasonably comfortable for such occasions, and most of the giants had brought blankets to cover themselves with. It was too late once they'd all eaten supper to practice their music for the jamboree, but the giants carefully placed their musical instruments in rows, some on the floor and some hanging from the specially constructed hooks on the walls. There was not enough room inside for all the giants' boots, and so Aunt Betty supervised them lining their footwear in rows around the outside of the Gritstone cottage. "Tie your boots together in a pair," she told the giants. "That way they'll be easier to find in the morning. The ladies' shoes can stay in the kitchen," she instructed Robina, Bertha and Penny Pie. Once the ladies' shoes were placed in the corner, though, Aunt Betty made a great fuss, trying to reach into the top cupboard to retrieve her lavender oil. She couldn't manage, of course, so Bertha was asked to pass it down, and Aunt Betty made an elaborate performance of sprinkling the sweet-smelling oil on some little pin cushions and placing them strategically around the room to freshen it up. Robina's face was growing redder and redder throughout this time, and Primrose was becoming more and more agitated by her aunt's behaviour. "Your shoes are very pretty," said Primrose to Robina, by way of distracting her from Aunt Betty, who was now wafting a lavender-infused cushion around the room. "You must tell me where you get them made." "Oh, they're far too big for you, Primrose," interjected Aunt Betty. "They probably don't make them in dainty sizes." "No. Well, perhaps in that case you could take her with you when you visit the human cobbler," retorted Robina, standing up from the stool she'd been occupying and towering over Aunt Betty. Just as the room fell silent at the sight of Robina and Aunt Betty glaring at each other, while Aunt Betty thought of a reply, there was a piercing scream from Primrose. Robina, Aunt Betty and the whole of the kitchen spun round to look at Primrose, who was pointing to the tiny kitchen window, which was like a round porthole. Only Primrose, Penny Pie and Bertha had seen the gruesome face staring in. "Oh my goodness," declared Penny Pie, nearly dropping her ukulele, which she'd been cleaning. "Grimwith," announced Bertha. "I'd recognise that face anywhere. I thought that ghoul had been quiet for a while. Does he come round here often?" Primrose was too upset to answer, and soon Plumpton was in the kitchen consoling his wife. "Come into the sitting room, everyone," called Plumpton after a while. "We need to tell you all something." They all squashed together into the sitting room, some standing, some sitting on the floor, and all looking suitably serious for the news they were about to hear. "Well, my friends," began Plumpton, "it looks like our enemies are stirring again. Primrose has been followed around this past month by Bedlam. Well, we suspect it's Bedlam, calling her nasty names and trying to intimidate her. Yesterday he said he was off to rally his friends, and no doubt he has if Grimwith is on the prowl. And that, my good friends, is why we asked you over for a jamboree. We need to make more noise than they do. We need to scare them off." "Hear, hear," said Crummock. "Without a doubt," said Dandymeyer. "And we need to dance," said Buttertup's. "Nothing puts the wind up that motley crew like the sound of our dancing. Us jolly Morris men slapping our thighs, crashing our swords and jingling our bells." "Yes, it's enough to make anyone run away," muttered Rowena under her breath. "Brilliant!" exclaimed Plumpton. "Brilliant!" "Just one thing, though," interrupted Auntie Betty. "Where are we going to make all this noise? There are little people round these parts, you know, and much as we want rid of Bedlam and his company, we don't want to alert the little people. Now, of course, if they're all like Uncle Shakespeare's friend—" "You're right, Auntie, you're right," interrupted Plumpton, before Aunt Betty could launch into a story about her famous relative and alter the course of the conversation. "Well, it's obvious, of course," said Buttertubs. "The ideal place is right on our doorstep. Brimham." "Yes, Brimham," exclaimed Bertha. "Ah, the beautiful Brimham," sighed Haworth, also known to his friends as the lovesick cowboy. "In the evening, of course," mentioned Rumbold, "when the coast is clear of the little folk." "Yes, of course," came the general agreement. And so the giants retired to bed, or to the floor, the settee, or those mats and cushions assigned to them, happy with their plan of action. The ladies were along the corridor in the bedrooms, of course. There were 5 of them, and they could just about squash into Primrose and Aunt Betty's beds, although Rowena, making sure she didn't have to share with Aunt Betty, had made up a bed in the bath. And that is the end of chapter 3. I look forward to hearing chapter 4.